Hello and welcome back. It's Margaret, and today we're going to continue with our design system series and go over typography. For many people, even seasoned designers, typography can be a bit of an elusive topic, but even though it does take some time to train your eye to notice what a balanced composition looks like, most UX designers wouldn't actually need to know all the terminology and the letter structures that someone like a font designer does. If you're building a design system from the ground up, one of the questions that you might have is, what font should I use? But first, let's differentiate what a typeface is and what a font is, because those two terms are often mixed up. So a typeface is a set of letters, symbols, or numbers that share the same design. So for example, Helvetica is a typeface, and then a font is a variation within the typeface. So for example, Helvetica bold 16 pixels. Now what you might want to start with first is the typeface, but you can easily end up spending a ton of hours browsing if you don't have some idea of what you're looking for. So consider your product. Who is your target audience, or what market are you in? For example, if you're selling luxury items, maybe you'll want to go with a serif typeface. So a serif is just a small flourish or embellishment at the end of each letter stroke. So you can probably guess that sans serif means any letters without those extra thingies at the end. If you're an exercise product, many brands out there go for something bold and sans serif. Or maybe you want your product to feel very friendly and approachable, so you can look into more rounder looking typefaces. But a word of caution, just like with graphic design, you don't want to go too crazy with having a ton of different typefaces or fonts, because it could confuse your user who would not know where to focus on, and it can really mess up your visual hierarchy. So I usually just stick to 1 to 2 typefaces max. Another thing about choosing typefaces is I usually go with ones that have a bunch of different font weights. So for example, bold, regular, light, and also ones that have italics and also really nice numbers. This way I know that I have a good selection to choose from. It's all just part of the same font family. I don't have to deviate too much. And it's also flexible enough for me to be able to use it for different scenarios. You'll notice that this is actually one of the things that free fonts don't have a ton of. So you might be able to have just maybe 1 or 2 font weights. The commercial licensed fonts generally have the entire font family. Okay, so how do I typically set up my type standards in a design system? Let's take a look. So within my design system, I have a page dedicated to typography. And then underneath over here, I just include a little blurb about why I've chosen these typefaces and kind of like really high level general usage of them. So for example, I have a typeface chosen for my headlines over here. You can tell that at the very ends, these are really pronounced serifs, which works great as titles. They're very stylized and beautiful, but as you can imagine, it could probably be a bit of a nightmare if you're trying to work with it at a really small size. For that reason, I also have a body copy and interactive elements typeface down here. So this one is sans serif. It's also very clean and modern and airy. Makes it really legible at smaller sizes. So if you want to use it for a long form copy, this is the typeface to go for. Now the typeface I've chosen for the headlines is actually a custom typeface, which means that you would probably have to upload it to your server and then load it onto a browser in order for it to show up. So this may not always render in a browser, and what you might want to do is have a backup typeface. So this is what I've chosen from Google Fonts, but taking it one step further, you will also want to make sure that in your CSS, you include just any serif font at the very end, so that even if either this one or this one is unable to render in your browser, you'll still get that serif look that you want. The same thing applies for your body copy. So in case your browser is unable to render this specific typeface, you want to go for a sans serif, any sans serif font within your CSS. When choosing a typeface for your body copy, you might also want to watch out for the X height, which is the height of the lowercase x. And if this is too small, meaning that there's a greater difference in size between your lowercase x and something like your capital letters, then it actually ends up being somewhat difficult to read. So you might have to bump up your font size in general for accessibility. I've also included a link to the font for developers to download and load up to either the website or the app if necessary, depending on the terms of the licensing that you might have for the font. For example, maybe it can only be used in up to 3 machines. You might want to indicate that as well, just in case people start downloading it like crazy and then you're violating the terms and conditions of the font. So moving on to the typography scale, this displays all the different sizes that my type is going to be in and also what font to use for each one. So I have a couple of different columns. The first one is sample text so that whoever is looking at this design system can get a sense of how it's supposed to look. And then I also have element or class, which is going to correspond to the CSS tags or classes that will be used for each one of these sizes. And then there's also properties. This is where I include the details of the font. So for example, what weight it is, which typeface it belongs to, what size should it be, and also what the leading should be. For line height or leading, it's generally set at 130 to 150% of the font size, but it can vary depending on your font. Fun fact, line height is also called leading because back then typesetters would put strips of lead in between lines of text for printing. I don't often adjust the kerning, which is the space between letters. And again, play around with the settings and see how the letters fit together. Unlike designing for print, you can't always just manually adjust some of the letters a little to the left or a little to the right. And also, text on the web can change sizes depending on the size of your screen. In the description column, I just include very, very basic guidelines for how they should be used. So for example, if this is going to be used only in headings, or for body and text links, or for things like category titles, graph titles, or input field labels. Once I've decided on my typography scale and finalized it, within Figma, I would create them as different text styles. So for example, click into one of them and then make sure that I establish this and add this as a new text style. And it's going to take in all my font size and also leading and kerning settings as well. And then I usually just name it whatever I've put in this element or class column. Now the last page I have under typography is usage. So again, just some additional guidelines on how these different text styles are supposed to fit together. So for example, in this first one, I have a label at the top, or a category title, and then at the bottom I have a headline. I also include a column for letter casing. So letter casing means how you should capitalize your letters. Common letter casing styles include title case, sentence case, initial case, and all caps. So for example, this one is title case for both the category titles and also the headlines. And title case means that you're only capitalizing keywords. So for example, words like to or is and of don't usually get capitalized. Sentence case means you only capitalize the first letter in the sentence. So for example, over here in the body copy, it's all sentence case. And this makes sense because it's for a long form copy anyway. And when you're usually reading sentences, that's how you would expect the capitalization to behave. There's an exception for things that would normally get capitalized anyway. So for example, names and titles. Initial case, which I don't have here, but it means that you capitalize the first letter of every word. So for example, if this one was initial case, then I would also capitalize to, even though it's not exactly a keyword. And then there's also all caps, which is exactly what it sounds like, capitalizing every single letter of all your words. You can choose to have different letter casing styles, but I generally try not to have more than 1 or 2 for consistency's sake. In this last column, you see that I also have some notes around how to use it. So for example, anything that have a title case, maybe I would want to limit it to 3 to 5 words max. Otherwise, I would probably want to put it into sentence case since it seems like it's more of a sentence. Or something like for headlines, only include punctuation at the end if there is more than one sentence. Just like for category titles, buttons should probably also not have way too many words, so limiting this to 3 to 5 words max. Otherwise, we should probably be using a text link, which can be sentence case. For input fields, placeholders, and labels, I also try to use no more than 3 words, and as a result, I can keep this title case as well. The placeholders, sometimes it might vary depending on what the content is. So for example, if you're including a date over here, it should probably all be capitalized because that's how it's typically formatted. Or if you were to have any sort of street addresses. At the end of the day, if you're not sure which typeface to go with, you can always do some quick usability testing with your target audience. So put together some text combination options and see which one they find easiest to read and also what brand attributes they tie back to. I'm also going to include some links in the description below for sites with a good selection of fonts. But if you want to stand out from the crowd and you're willing to pay for fonts, I encourage you to check out some type foundries too. Leave a comment below on what some of your favorite typefaces are. Until next time, bye!